very ill with dysentery and violent internal pain. My liver, too, is in such a state that I have to walk with my hands tied to my neck to prevent my arms from moving, as their least motion gives me intense pain. I am, I regret to say, beginning to look backwards. My life has become a burden to me. Oh, it should not be. These are the words of James Hannington when he was overcome with sickness. Dysentery is not a stomach ailment. It's a brutal war of dehydration and decay. The intestines inflame and bleed. Every movement sends knives of pain throughout the body. The bowels empty again and again until strength drains away like water from a cracked jar. Your muscles ache, joints throb, and the fever burns. Your liver becomes inflamed and swollen and presses against the ribs until even the swing of one's arms is agony. Breathing itself becomes a reminder that your body is breaking down from within. For Hannington, this was not a glorious missionary march across Africa. It was a crawl through fire. Each step was a battle, each day a question of whether his body would carry him further, or whether the swamp, the fever, and the pain would claim him long before Buganda ever did. After leaving Romwa's place on January 22, 1883, Hannington made it to Kagei. Kagei was a port on the south bank of Lake Victoria. C.F. Holmes tells us that it was probably within 3 miles of the modern administrative district or ward of Kayenze. Kagei gradually became important in the 1870s as a minor collection and storage depot due to the decline of the Kagei route to Buganda. And soon, the Wangwana, the freedmen from the coast, were calling it the second Zanzibar. Every merchant worth their salt went to Kagei. Arabs had set up shop in this part of Usukuma, territory of the Sukuma people, who allowed them to be there, at a cost of course. It was a staging port for goods destined to and from every part of the lake, but most importantly, goods going to Buganda. Buganda sought to expand its influence south to incorporate Kagei, which was in Usukuma. That's how important it was. And it was well known that canoes to go anywhere on the lake were to be found at Kagei. So it made sense for Hannington to be there. And he was not the first missionary to pass there. Remember the CMS men, Smith and O'Neill, who had been killed at Bukarebe, cut down in a storm of anger and misunderstanding? At the center of it was Songoro, an ex-slave and Arab trader tied very closely to Mutesa of Buganda. And it was his quarrel with Rukonge, the ruler of Bukarebe, that resulted in their deaths. You see, Songoro had made Buganda's trade on the lake flourish. He ferried ivory, slaves, even Arabs and Europeans themselves across the waters to Kagei, the bustling port of Usukuma. To Mutesa, Songoro was more than a merchant. He was his man, his bridge to a wider world. But to Rukonge, Songoro started to become an arrogant intruder, and he had a bone to pick with him. Timber was left unpaid for a doe, lies were told, boundaries were crossed. It came to a head when Songoro defied his orders and shot one of his men. The missionaries who stood nearby became caught up in the violence. This is where we get a bit more context on how they died. Now, apparently, Rukonge issued pardons for them. He even offered protection. But guess what? They refused, choosing instead to side with Songoro in some sort of misguided idea of solidarity. I don't really know or understand it. And so to the men of Rukonge, this type of arrogance was too much to bear. They killed him. and everyone who was with them. When Rukonga got the news, it said that he exclaimed, "Ah, my country is finished!" And he was right. The killing enraged Mutesa. Not only did the trade to and from Buganda suffer, but Rukonge's men had killed Europeans who were on their way to see him. They were, in other words, his guests. And so Mutesa struck Bukedebe, crushing Rukonga and reducing him, as Hartwig later wrote, to little more than Buganda's slave. Now, perhaps that was a better option for Bukedebe, because down south, even Mirambo saw an opportunity. He told the British consul John Kirk that he would avenge the missionaries by wiping out the Ukerewe island. For him, it was an opportunity to further endear himself to the missionaries' true source of power, the British Empire. But Kagei would have been a nice prize too, because if he took it, that would have put him directly between Buganda and the coast, putting him in a better position to strengthen his relationship with Buganda, which Mutesa seemed hesitant about, despite Mirambo making attempts to make it happen. Whoever controlled Kagei controlled the passage between the lake and the land. So the port became, in a sense, a hinge of a world. Here, Jesuit priests fresh from Rubaga and Buganda crossed paths with Protestant men bound for the interior. Here, Arabs like Said bin Sair, remembered by some as Said bin Saif, became known as the white man's friend, smoothing the way for those who passed by. Here, Baganda canoes carried ivory and human lives across the lake, thereby enriching their kingdoms. It was into this crucible that James Hannington arrived. He didn't step into a quiet fishing village, but a storm. At Kagei, every actor, Buganda, Mirambo, Sukuma, Zinza, Ziba, Arabs, Europeans, even island chiefs like Rukonge fought to control the routes that would shape their futures. And Hannington, the man sent to bring light, would soon learn just how dangerous the shadows could be. After arriving there, he planned to rescue Gordon and Ashe by sending canoes. However, it turned out that Romwa had let them go. Maybe he had a change of heart. Ashe had gone back south to Msalala, where they had left their things. That way, he could come back up with them so they could go across the lake to Buganda. But when Gordon arrived, him and Hannington instead made a plan that Hannington should travel to Msalala as well and help Ashe bring all the things back up. That turned out to be Hannington's undoing. Still very sick, he made the journey back south, avoiding Romwa's lands at all costs. He was not about to be held up by him again, but it turned out that he ended up being held up by someone else. Passing through the Mwanza Gulf, which was controlled by a small state called Urima, or Burima, one of the many Sukuma chiefdoms, he was stopped since he crossed through areas where people had never seen a white man before, at least according to him. He was taken to an ambassador of the king of Urima, where he had to endure a conversation due to the fact that it needed to be translated into the Chidima language. Hannington would speak in Kiswahili to his interpreter, who would then say whatever he said to the ambassador in Chidima. For some reason, the interpreter would apparently speak only 4 words at a time, and it would always end with the phrase, Baba. For example, he would say, "The great white man, Baba, has come a long distance, Baba. He has come to see the black man, Baba. He has come to teach the black man, Baba." And so on and so forth. It's a really funny way of translating stuff. And apparently when he spoke, no one would make a sound. Then when he finished, everyone would turn to the king's ambassador, and they would say whatever they needed to say. Again, here he found demonstrations of power. The ambassador asked him for offerings for the king, which apparently he had none. In some cases, he would say he wasn't available to speak, which meant extra days of waiting. Sometimes up to 3 days. This all took too long for the already ailing Hannington when all he wanted were canoes to cross the lake to Msalala. But finally, they were given to him, and when he arrived, James Hannington knew that he was done. This is what he wrote to a Mr. Wigram. Open quotes. I dread to write to you, because my letter is one of the keenest disappointments and contains no good news. I am not dull at my broken health and the constant pain I suffer. I am not dull at the very slight prospect from a human point of view that I shall ever reach home. I am dull that I have been permitted to do so little for the society. I am dull because I think that a few pounds extra in outfit would have made an immense difference to me. If I live a little longer, I will write a short list of things that I have personally suffered much from not having. 10 pounds will, I think, cover them all. One, blame no one. It was simply a matter of want of experience. But alas, it cost both myself and the society much, for I am a practical failure, and I have suffered terribly. Forgive me. I hope my heart is full of praise for the tender mercies of the Lord. Even today, I have experienced that. Close quotes. Hannington made arrangements before he left. Gordon would proceed with Ashe to Buganda, and he would return home. And with that, he packed up his belongings and left. Reverend Ashe wrote about what he saw that day as he bade farewell to his friend. Open quotes. My eyes followed the tall, receding figure, now indeed bowed with the intense pain and suffering he had undergone, and I wondered as I watched him whether he would ever accomplish the long 800 miles of swamp and wilderness with its certain toils and unknown perils which lay between him and Zanzibar. Close quotes. It would indeed be the last time he would ever see him alive. Amazingly, James Hannington made it back to Zanzibar, despite the porters believing that he was going to die and attempting to abandon him. It's interesting that during all that time, Hannington and his companions never asked what the natives took to alleviate the illnesses that afflicted them on their journey. Many of them traveled back and forth several times. Surely they had native medicine that they could have tried. But to the missionaries, only European drugs were to be considered. And it also didn't help that treatments in Africa were often mixed in with religious aspects which the missionaries deemed evil or witchcraft. His suffering over the 8 months of travel would sear into his brains the desire to find a better route, a healthier route, he called it, when he would make a second attempt to reach Buganda. And to James Hannington, that route was in the east. A decision that would ultimately seal his fate. Thanks so much for listening. James Hannington's story doesn't end here. In February, we'll continue with the next chapter of his journey. In the meantime, I'll be sharing a few episodes in between. Some will be standalone, and others will build the world that he was stepping into. These are fascinating stories, ones you've most likely never heard of before, but I hope you'll enjoy them. Until next time, peace.